All right. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Welcome to our town hall. Today is July 13th. Thank you very much. We are having a fantastic town hall on universal basic income and the future of work. Sorry, already. My name is Tisa Rodriguez, and I'm the chair of the Riverside County Democratic Party. I'd like to welcome everyone joining us on Zoom, Facebook Live, Twitter, YouTube, and on Twitch. Everyone on Zoom except for the speakers will be muted. If you're on Zoom, you can ask questions by typing them in the chat. You can also do the same if you're following us today on our Facebook Live feed. If you're with us in one of those areas, we'll make sure that someone sees your question, and then we're able to ask it today. Please be aware that the feeds may be a minute or two behind the Zoom videos, but we are going to make sure that we get to you. Now I'm going to start with our guests. Oh, God. Really? David Kim is running for Congress in the 34th District in Los Angeles on a platform of universal basic income, Medicare for all, and a Green New Deal. He has been a lawyer and a neighborhood council member for MacArthur Park, and his grassroots congressional campaign has been endorsed by Andrew Yang and Marianne Williamson. A child of Korean immigrants, David understands that the American dream and wants to fight to restore its promise. David Ellars is the founder of Forward United, an advocacy group for universal basic income. He lives in the Victor Valley and ran for Congress in the 8th Congressional District in 2020. In the 2020 primary on a platform of people first and platform of universal health care, basic income, and green energy. He and his wife of 10 years have 2 children, and he continues to fight for his local community. Liam O'Mara is a history professor from a working class family of union laborers. Liam has worked as a union longshoreman, a union fry cook, and a computer nerd. He later took on a lot of student debt to finish a PhD. Liam has taught courses for 12 years and focuses on the history of ideas. Liz Lavertu is with us. Liz Lavertu is a mother, a small businesswoman, and the chair of the Spring Valley Community Planning Group. She's been an active volunteer in her community for over 20 years. Liz is running for Congress on a platform to help shape up our education system, healthcare, and the environment. The 71st Assembly District is in East County, San Diego, Idlewild, Anza, Valley Vista, Sage, and more. Kate Schwartz will be unable to join us, but she is our candidate in the 75th Assembly District, and she'll return next week for a discussion on education. Thank you so much. We're going to start with David.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you for having me. All right. My name is David Kim. I am running for Congress here in Los Angeles, in California's 34th Congressional District. We are the 10th poorest congressional district in the nation, with our per capita income being around $12,000 to $15,000 in a lot of parts of our district. So if you could imagine giving direct cash relief, universal basic income to the members of our community, how much life that would give back to our communities and really empower them to really see the light at the end of the tunnel and pull themselves up. And so our platform is all about fighting for financial freedom, love and justice for everyone. Pre-COVID-19, masses of people were working 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Currently, we have masses of people having 0 jobs to make ends meet. And so I think, unfortunately, everything's been accelerated to expose everything that isn't working. And so that's why we're running on our platform in this district. So thank you for having me. I'm excited for this discussion.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now let's have a few words from James Ellars.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me. My name is James Ellars. I am born and raised in California. I live up the hill in Victorville. And again, thank you for having me. Thank you for everybody being here. The conversation of universal basic income, it's something we were talking about before 2020. And right now it just seems more relevant than ever. I mean, we have millions and millions of people unemployed that are going to be coming off of that extra amount with unemployment next month. We have people just struggling to pay bills right now. And right now, again, I appreciate having this conversation because universal basic income is something that can make a lot of these problems we're facing right now a lot more easy to solve. It's not a one thing cures all policy. It's something that will help cure a lot of the problems that we're having. So I'm glad to have this conversation. I appreciate you having me, and I look forward to hearing from everybody here.
Wonderful. So now we're going to go to Leo Mamara. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, so Liam O'Mara again for Congressional District 42. Looks like our starting comments were a little shorter than I thought, so I'm going to sound like I'm rambling way, way, way long. So please forgive the academic in me for talking too much anyway. But okay, so, why are we talking about UBI at all? Poverty in America is one of the dirty little secrets that our politicians have stopped addressing. I mean, far from the days when we had Johnson's war on poverty. For the last 20 years, all we've heard about is what a great economy we have from whichever party's in office, and the other mostly silent on it. I mean, the stock markets have done great. The rich are certainly getting richer. But the bottom half of the country has lost $1 trillion in wealth. Poverty is on the rise. Debt is exploding, and the middle class is shrinking. It's down by about 20%. Thinking of our area there, I mean, less than 40% of the Inland Empire even makes a living wage, and extreme poverty and homelessness are both growing. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, extreme poverty means living on less than $2 a day. And yes, that is very much a thing here in the richest country on earth. About 40 million people fit that classification, including 1 million households with children. Brookings has estimated the proportion of Americans living in extreme poverty is as high in the US or higher than it is in Russia, Albania, and the occupied West Bank. And even beyond extreme poverty, the relatively poor share of the population is huge and growing, and the social and psychological impact of poverty in the US should not be dismissed. Being surrounded by people who are able to buy the latest stuff while you barely subsist on top ramen puts a tremendous strain on your psyche. And what frustrates me about poverty as a historian is that it can be solved. Its existence is a political choice. And rather than using the sort of social programs that can lift people up, give them a chance to stand on their own 2 feet and thrive, we've grown more and more stingy. Because Republicans keep getting away with recycling 2-century-old arguments that everyone can get rich and poverty is just a lack of character. In the process, just ignoring vast reams of empirical evidence that most people given a leg up can thrive, but take that away and a lot of people really can't. And year after year, they strip more and more money away from the programs that would reduce crime, reduce poverty, and reduce the pain that we have in this country. Thinking of the social programs, not only that, a lot of our anti-poverty programs were racist from their inception in their design and implementation, and that's created a real legacy for us as well. Everything from the redlining seen in New Deal community investments to the welfare reforms passed under Bill Clinton, inspired by Reagan-era dog whistles about Black welfare queens. I mean, those myths continue to persist, and they point to a sad truth about American culture. Polls have consistently shown when you talk to voters about things like UBI that would help them, people are like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And then as soon as you mention that minorities and immigrants will qualify for them, like, oh, maybe we shouldn't do that. Right? That's a bit of a problem already. But and the American right has long harnessed that power of racism to push through the regressive policies that continue to worsen things, to make things worse for the poor. This has been with us from the very beginning of this country here. Now, would realigning the American economy fix the structural issues and would solving poverty eliminate racism? No, of course not. But it would remove racism as a major rallying cry with crossover political appeal, making it a lot harder for the racists to win power. And right now, racist politicians can attract swing voters by shifting the blame for lost jobs and for crime onto specifically targeted others. Note our current president. We have to recognize that crime is closely correlated with poverty. The better off people are, the less likely they are to feel compelled to steal from their neighbors. So if you address the poverty, you address the crime, you reduce the crime, you remove a target used by racist politicians to motivate racist voters. So is there racism in the US? Yes. Is that something that needs to change? Yes. But do we have to first convince all racists to change before we even address poverty? I mean, these issues are kind of interrelated to some extent. They are different, but they're connected. And if we can find a way to alleviate poverty that the racists can't ruin, that they can't shift blame onto and use that kind of welfare queen nonsense, we could start acting to eliminate poverty right now. And what if doing so made it actually easier to win the argument against systemic racism? And what if we had an easy way here to lower the crime, eliminate extreme poverty, and make up for the jobs we're losing too? I mean, automation's in the title of this program for today, so let's talk about that for a second. It is true that millions of manufacturing and service sector jobs in the U.S. have disappeared. Is China to blame for all of it? Is Mexico to blame for all of it? Are immigrants to blame for? No. The U.S. actually manufactures more now than we ever have before, but we do it with far fewer people. The robots have been taking our jobs, and 47% of the jobs we still have left are at imminent risk from automation. That's almost half of Americans who will have to find a new career. And the pandemic we're in right now, it's already been estimated that about 42% of the jobs being lost right now will never come back. They'll simply disappear. And since we've been cutting education spending, making it more and more expensive, and a lot of the newer careers anyway in manufacturing and whatnot are highly technical, there's only so many jobs you're going to replace this way. And education can only fill so much of that gap, although we should make higher education and trade schools more affordable. That's a whole different policy issue, but still related. Now, but the automation itself doesn't have to be a threat per se. And I don't want to sound like a Luddite here. Automation's been unfolding for centuries. And yes, it's been accelerating over the past half century, but it's a normal process. The acceleration is now going to speed up even more with artificial intelligences and biotech. Many jobs that seem perfectly safe today are going to disappear. I literally have friends who are working in artificial intelligence research. Your white-collar job is not safe. And if there's not going to be enough opportunities to create new jobs, what do we do with the people who don't have any work? I mean, well, wait a minute. What if we start valuing jobs like healthcare and education and child and elder care and the arts, none of which currently count into GDP? They literally, what I do for a living literally does not count into our gross domestic product. And a lot of the jobs are actually very poorly compensated too. A UBI would really help with that. On top of that, let's start taxing the robots and use the profits coming from the automation and that increased productivity to provide that income for people, which would let them pursue careers that might be more personally fulfilling to them and still provide an important social need. We could also, and I know this sounds like a radical concept, we could afford to work far fewer hours, which would lower our stress levels, increase our happiness, make family life easier and more stable, and we would live longer. That seems like a good idea, doesn't it? Economists from John Stuart Mill in the mid-19th century to John Maynard Keynes in the mid-20th century all argued that automation would increase productivity, and that productivity would lower our working hours. Keynes thought that we'd be working 15-hour weeks by now. Are you working a 15-hour week? If so, I'm super jealous. Right? Instead, Americans are working longer hours than the populations of any other rich country in the world except for South Korea and Israel. On average, Americans work 70 hours more than the Japanese, 110 hours more than the British, 300 hours more than the French, and 420 hours per year more than the Germans. The results can be seen in poor performance on international rankings in health and happiness because we work harder, we're paid less, and we're dying sooner and in more pain. Americans deserve better. So there's a moral argument for universal basic income along with an economic argument. The question of how it's affordable is one that I'd love to see more than in the discussion come up, like different ways to do that. I'm hoping that David and James will contribute some to that part of it here. But one part of the answer to how this is even affordable, I can hit very briefly before I finally shut up. One part of it really lies in understanding the foundations of our economy. We completed the movement from a capital goods basis to a consumer goods basis faster than any other country in the world. For an entire century, our economy has been dependent upon consumer spending. So think about the low growth rates that you see across the rich world today and the much higher growth rates that you see in the developing world. The higher growth rates in all those places are because they still have a strong capital goods base in the economy. That means they're laying down the infrastructure. They're building the roads and the rail networks and the factories and all that kind of stuff that would build things up later. We don't need that kind of stuff anymore. It's a small part of our economy. But we would still have much better growth rates, and more people would do well if we had more money to spend in a consumer economy. Right? So wages are absolutely important, and wages have been stagnant for 40 years. The poverty in my district, in James's district, and in David's district are all obscenely high. And this is because our wages have not kept up with the cost of living. The lack of disposable income has slowed overall growth rates. It causes a massive spike in household debt. It limits our ability to save for retirement. It's given us a massive expansion in childhood and old age poverty, which, you know, Social Security was supposed to prevent. So the solution for me, give people money. Does it fix everything? No. We have decades of economic deterioration. We have centuries of social issues. There's tons of other things that we have to deal with as well. But ending extreme poverty will give more people a chance to thrive. It will help the overall economy. And we can do it in a way that also stimulates new industries, raises our quality of life, which is now down to 17th in the world. I see no downside to this and no excuse not to do it. Arguments for universal basic income or guaranteed minimum incomes, they cross partisan lines too. They can be argued from the left or the right. This isn't just some airy issue for like the wacko left with its concern for the lives of the poor. It's also an issue that had support from right-wingers like Friedrich von Hayek, Milton Friedman, and Richard freaking Nixon. That crossover appeal means it's an argument we can win and something we can do today to help people. All we got to do is try. So I'll shut up now.
Oh, thank you very much. Now we're going to go to Liz Lavertu for some words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tisa. Yeah, so I do support universal basic income. I'm running for state assembly though. So honestly, this is something that needs to be taken care of at the federal level. And that's why I support David Kim and Liam O'Mara for Congress, because I know that they'll help lead the way with AOC and everybody else who's, supporting it in Congress currently. So, looking at universal basic income, it's been tested in lots of different areas throughout the world. And, the research does show that when people have a universal basic income, that they are healthier, they lead a more stress-free life, and they're happier, and they do live longer, like Liam was saying. And it definitely looks at addressing some of the problems that we're facing now during COVID and what we will be facing in the future with automation, like Liam was saying. A lot of people on the other side who don't support UBI, universal basic income, they're concerned that people will become lazy and that they'll just not work anymore. But it's actually been shown that people are willing to take lower paying jobs when they have a universal basic income. So once, like in, where was it? I think it was in Finland. There was a test group that was getting universal basic income. And so, people were getting, taking on those lower paying jobs and being okay with, doing that kind of work. And as soon as that basic income was gone, then they no longer, wanted to have those lower paying jobs, and they needed to go find jobs that, paid more. So, looking at it, should we, raise minimum wage, to a livable income? We could do that, but then, there's, we'd be at odds with other things, we'd be facing other problems. Or could we just give it to everybody? And, there's been some debate, and I know David and James will probably weigh in on this, at what age would it be appropriate to get universal basic income? I personally feel like 18, is the age that I would prefer. Some people say 16, there's arguments on both sides, depending on, 16 versus 18. And then also, what is the amount? Like, how much would somebody get a week or a month? Like, what does that amount look like? Is it something that you could actually live on, or would it have to be subsidized with, other income as well? If we get it right, if we find that right dollar amount, and I'm hoping James and David will weigh on this as the experts, but then we could look at no longer needing to have unemployment or EBT, other social programs, if we can get it to the amount where people can live off of that dollar amount, help end poverty, and then it's everybody gets it, and there's no stigma. There's no stigma on people. And the reason why, people like Republicans on the right like this idea is because it actually makes government smaller. They no longer have to vet every single person that's applying for these programs of unemployment, and everybody gets it. So it really cuts a lot of the overhead cost, and also the stigma, of getting that. I know a lot of people who would qualify for those programs and really do need those programs, but don't want to apply for them. But now we're seeing in the age of COVID, over 25% of Americans are applying for unemployment, which is hitting crazy numbers. I was just actually, right before we got on, just so everybody else knows, I had applied for unemployment back on March 22nd. March 17th was my last day of work. And I finally got my card in the mail. You can't see it, I have a virtual background, but yeah, finally got my card in the mail. So I finally had that money. But, for a lot of people, if you went 12, 13 weeks without any pay whatsoever, they'd be in a really tough, difficult situation, and luckily a lot of states and, local governments put in like a stop on evictions. But honestly, not everybody had that, in the nation. So, I mean, there's a lot of good things when it comes to it, but I'm hoping that our experts can dive a little bit deeper into that. But in general, I support it, and I hope that our leaders in Congress will look at, the details of what that looks like going forward and helping us here in the United States now.
So, let's dive a little bit more into that. So, David Kim, can you please tell us a little bit more about what universal basic income is? And
Yeah.
the nuts and bolts, please, as much as you like, because we want to learn.
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much. So I'll go back. So UBI is something that was just recently, it's not something that was recently introduced or kind of formulated by current leaders that we have in the scene in government right now. We do give credit to Andrew Yang, Scott Santins, and various other individuals recently who did bring it back onto the National Roundtable discussion radar to talk about. But it's an idea that originated prior back to one of our four founding fathers of the country, Thomas Paine, where he believed that the concept of land ownership was so absurd because before the British came over, before people started coming over to colonize, the Native Americans were on the land, but before the Native Americans were there, the land was there. And so how can you own land? And so he was championing this idea of a land endowment tax fund where everybody would pay a tax into this fund, and from this fund, everybody over the age of, I believe it was 21, is able to take part of this fund as a basic income, a guaranteed basic income, and be able to share in that. And it was also then again brought up again later on by various other individuals, the most prominent being Martin Luther King Jr. About a year before he was assassinated, he was on his last book speaking tour called, and his book was titled, "Where Do We Go From Here?" And he talks about the current conditions of our country, kind of racially, poverty, and how there is this blatant war on poverty and race that Liam was referring and referencing earlier. And it's even today, it's institutionalized in every aspect, even with our policing, our criminal justice system, our housing policies, everything. It's a war on poverty and race straight out. And so with that, what MLK was touching upon was the economic aspect of, we have so many people living in poverty, and we know that that's the case, and we have these great ideas of how to go ahead and address and abolish poverty and eradicate it. But then once we go to the implementation of it all, we set up all of these programs, and then the programs then they address and resolve everything else before actually solving and addressing and eradicating poverty. And so he was saying how everything falls short, and the only way to really eradicate it and abolish it directly is with a guaranteed income. And so this is something that he was championing right before he was assassinated. And now recently, I mean, some of those who are watching are pretty familiar with Andrew Yang's freedom dividend and how the dollar amount that he was championing was $1,000 a month. And I know that Liz had brought up what would be a good dollar amount. And I think that's a good discussion to have here and talk about. So thanks for bringing that up, Liz. And so it's just the universal basic income is the idea of giving all of our, and this is also something we can talk about, giving all of our US citizens or all of our taxpayers and permanent residents. So that's also kind of these nuts and bolts we need to screw on more tightly and accurately define. So there's different ways to go ahead and do it, but how do we go ahead? Because I think all of us sort of can agree that this is the way to go ahead and give life back to our people, because just like Liam was saying, we've been in a 40+ year wage stagnation, ever increasing, widening wealth gap disparity, and nobody's doing anything about it. The average American used to have 3 legs on a chair, and those 3 legs being 1, pensions from your company, from your employer, number 2, savings, number 3, Social Security. But what did they do with pensions? Pensions were no longer 30 years ago. Not everybody has pensions. And so now you have 2 legs left on that chair, and they were, at the time, they were saying, oh, we'll make it up somehow, but that was never made up. Now you have 2 legs of a chair left, one diminishing because a lot of Americans don't have savings. Savings don't exist when a lot of us continue to live on debt and purchase more debt. And so then on top of that, our Social Security, we haven't had an expansion in 50 years? And so with that decreasing all the time, it's like, where are you leaving the American people? Stop talking this bullshit of how much you love the people and how much you're ruling and representing the people when your actions are clearly not showing it. What the fuck? And so it's kind of that realization, I feel, that this discussion is why we're having it, to sort of turn on and activate the people like, yo, you're being taken advantage of right now as a person living in this country that we call America, the land of the free. Are you free? No, you're not financially free right now. None of us are. And so I think that's very important, and why we need to go ahead and talk about these ideas like universal basic income. And also, I know that Liam had talked about how he made it very clear that he's not saying this will solve racism or anything, but I feel that it'll help, but then we also need to talk a separate discussion about reparations, because that's a whole nother topic that we need to talk about. But UBI is this topic for this live stream, and so this is definitely something we can help implement with Medicare for All, with these different policy issues, with free public college and vocational schools, because the love component of our platform, and I know that Liam's platform and Liz's, I think all of us sort of emanate, is we need to take care of our people. And for us, when you say that you love somebody, when you say that you love your people, you need to put those words into action. When I say I love my boyfriend, we won't believe each other unless we see it in action. It's also a verb. And so what does that look like for politicians, for people that are elected to the government? And to me, it looks like ensuring that everybody is able to feed themselves. Everybody is able to sleep under a roof. Everybody is able to have access to healthcare, to education, to be able to pay for basic expenses, because there's going to be a time where some people can't get jobs. What are we going to do then? They're going to go on the streets. And I think that is a very deadly perspective and mindset that our elected leaders have right now, and it's murderous. And so I think we really need to wake up, go ahead and explore what ways we can really help the people, and UBI is one of them. And it's not to say, and I know that Liz had talked about how some people might think, oh, it's a handout, wouldn't that get people lazy? Another con argument or against it would be, no, if you give UBI, wouldn't that get rid of all the safety net programs and assistance programs that people are currently receiving? Again, that goes on to the implementation of it all. How do you implement it so that we're not pulling the carpet out from people that are currently receiving benefits and whose sustenance in life fully depends on it right now? No, then don't do that. Don't take away their benefits. Let them keep their benefits. Give them a UBI. But it's kind of these things where it's like, I guess for those who are listening, let's open our perspective. Let's broaden it a little bit, because there are ways we can work on universal basic income and crafting one that fits for the people. Whether that be, some might say, hey, wouldn't it be unfair to give that same UBI amount to somebody that's living in a town that isn't expensive or doesn't have a high cost and standard of living as somebody in LA or in New York? yeah, that's a legit question. Let's talk about it. How do we craft a UBI that fits for the people? How do we fund that? And I think that's why all of us are here. And one last point I just wanted to, or two last things, is having been somebody that our family, we received a lot of assistance from different safety net programs. And there was a point where like people and families in our communities knew we were all getting assistance, but we would never talk about it because it was so shameful and embarrassing. But then if we were to able to give this to each person and say, this is your right, because you've been contributing to this country and we value you because of who you are and not because you have a job or not because you have this degree or that, but because you exist and you're contributing to making us a better country and a better society and community, you're getting this. And so it's that mindset that I feel like we really need to instill for ourselves, because when we start implementing means test programs and perpetuating that, we shut out so many people. There's 1 out of 4 people who qualify for receiving assistance from our safety net programs but aren't currently getting it, because once you implement something like a means test, you're automatically shutting out people because you're already putting up that application hurdle where they need to jump through. And some people might not be able to have that because they're working day in and day out and not have the resources or time to do that. And so I think, and who are we to set up these arbitrary means test of, oh, if you make this income level or if you have this much, then you qualify, but you don't, even though you might have just lost a job and have no money right now, you still don't qualify our means test. And so I think UBI is something where we can really use and talk about to address the inefficiencies that we've had up until now. And so, so I know your question, Tisa, was, what is UBI? UBI is giving a guaranteed basic income to the people because it's their money and they know how to use it best.
Oh, there it is. Sorry. Absolutely. So now we're going to go back to James Ellars to kick off a bit of a detailed question. So one thing you had mentioned to us, David, just now is, how do you work out some of those details? So James, can you talk to us a little bit? We have people here from all different areas. We have people in LA. We have people here in the Victor Valley. We have people in Lake Elsinore. We have people watching at home, all different places, all different costs of living. What are the current thoughts about how that factors in to the idea of UBI?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is a great question that's discussed pretty often. So again, there's a couple different contexts for what we're talking about. Before COVID and after COVID. So the discussion that was brought to the attention of the nation before COVID was due to automation and large companies kind of soaking up all the business of local companies and those local jobs going away. And it'll get to the question. I'm just setting it up. But what we were saying before was a lot of the local businesses and local jobs being soaked up by companies like Amazon, where before it was estimated that Amazon would cause 30% of malls and small businesses to close over the next few years, pre-COVID. And Amazon, having all those resources, had the resources to figure out how to not pay that many, like hardly any taxes at all. There's a couple of years where they paid 0 taxes. They paid a little bit in the last few years. But so we've been seeing all this money and resources being sucked out of these communities, and there hasn't really been anything to replace it. So again, back to Liam's point, America's producing more than we ever have. We're the richest country in the history of the world, but a very few amount of people are able to take part in that. So in terms of the amount, and we can get to the funding, we can get to the age range, the amount, again, we were talking about pre-COVID was $1,000 a month per every adult 18 and over. Now there is discussion whether you could be younger or older. I personally think that 18 should still be the age, because this will be pumping money into these communities so that if people that are younger it should generate more jobs available to them, and then they will get that when they're 18 and older. So for example, in Victorville, California, so in my hometown, $1,000 a month for everyone 18 and older would pump $95 million into our city every month. For Riverside, which I know a lot of you are at, that would $1,000 a month universal basic income would fund $256 million every single month into that city. So when we're looking at, okay, a lot of small businesses are going away because of, before it was automation, now it's also COVID. If that money was being put into your local economy every single month, would these small businesses be able to survive? Would people locally that don't have jobs or don't have high enough income, would they be able to get better jobs, get better raises, start a business, right? These are things that, again, it's all about people, taking care of people. We're in the richest economy in the world, and if we can make the system work so that it works not only for the big businesses, big corporations, but also for the people on the local level, we need to do that. Now, when it comes to the amounts right now, COVID, I personally think, and again, this is a discussion, anybody can say their opinions on what their amounts are. I personally think that instead of propping people up with unemployment again, there needs to be a universal basic income of $2,000 a month that steps down as the crisis goes away. That can step down to a permanent UBI. $1,000 a month, I think, might not be enough right now. So maybe at least it steps down to $1,200 a month per person after COVID. But right now, I feel like it's one of the few things that can make a huge impact on a national scale, where we're not, we were just talking about, like, people here have been waiting to get on unemployment. Bills don't stop coming in while you're waiting for these qualifications to come in, and now that people are finally getting on unemployment, the emergency unemployment goes away at the end of July. So what we're seeing now is very, very urgently, people need another option, because if that emergency unemployment of the extra $600 a week goes away and those millions and millions of people just can't pay bills, like the evictions are going to be massive. The things that are going to happen in August and September right now, if we don't do anything, are catastrophic. So what we're saying is, hey, these corporations like Amazon, Google, they're making billions and billions, and they're talking about eventually Amazon having $1 trillion valuation. Like, they can afford to pay their fair share. So what the countries, a lot of European countries use is a value-added tax. It's a consumption tax. So it's something that they can avoid, like they're doing right now, is just being able to avoid the taxes. And it also taxes, it's a consumption tax. So it's the people that make more or consume more will be paying more taxes versus the people on the other end of the scale that might be more closer to poverty. So it benefits, it puts it on a fair scale where the people that are making more and consuming more and producing more are paying more in the tax, and then it is benefiting the people that are closer to poverty, because they're still paying a little more in taxes, but they're also getting more through a universal basic income. So that's how we kind of can balance the scales right now, because right now before COVID, inequality was at a 50-year high, and right now it's gone far, far worse. And literally all we're saying is, hey, if you want to help the most people the fastest, implement some sort of universal basic income, because not only can it help the most people, it'll do it faster, because you don't have to go through all these different qualifications of it being means tested and everything like that. So again, this was the conversation before COVID even hit. Right now we're seeing 10 years of change within 10 months. So it's something that is going to be needed urgently right away. And the faster that we can get to that point, the better off more people will be, again, especially for these local communities. I don't know about anyone else here, but my local mall opened up a couple weeks ago, and today I was like, I'll go check it out. I'll go see how the businesses are doing. Maybe 10% of the businesses that are in there are actually open. The rest of them are closed. I don't know if they ever plan on opening, but if that's any indication of what's happening on the local level for businesses, like we need something urgently to inject cash into our local economies. And again, for Victorville, if $90 million got injected in this local economy every single month, those businesses would be thriving. Same thing with Riverside, $256 million every single month into that local economy would solve a lot of issues. Again, universal basic income doesn't solve all the issues, but it makes them a lot easier to solve. And especially at a time where there are people legitimately suffering, and especially coming up when that emergency unemployment expires, we need something in place that will make up for that, and something that's going to have a lasting effect, because it's not going to just get better overnight. Like, this is something that's going to take years and years and years to get back to even where we were. And we need mechanisms and solutions in place that we didn't have before. Liam.
I could add a couple of thoughts there on just the question of cost of living adjustments, as well as Liz had brought up the elimination of other social programs, because I think they're actually related, or at least they're related in the way that I would answer them. I mean, first off, in terms of social programs, I'd allow them to be phased out if things work well with a UBI, meaning that the people who most need them benefit from them in addition to for a while, giving them a chance to really get a leg up. It gets you a chance to like actually save up, start investing, start a business, whatever you need to do to basically solve the poverty issue, because the very poorest have much bigger problems than a lot of the middle class do, who will benefit immediately from a UBI. So setting that aside, I'd let them be phased out, but a lot of people would end up being able to let them go relatively quickly, especially in lower cost of living states or areas. If you don't have the kind of expenses, I mean, I've seen rents in my fiance's neck of the woods of like $400 for a nice detached place of your own. Like, are you kidding me? Some parts of this country, it's still pretty cheap to live. So you wouldn't end up needing a lot of those programs. The UBI would basically take care of that need almost immediately. So what I do in terms of like cost of living issues is allow those programs to stay in place, which means that poorer people in high cost areas like Los Angeles, the Inland Empire, New York City, Chicago, would be able to like stack them for a little while in order to build up a bit. And as the local economy expands a bit, as opportunities expand, as people have an opportunity to improve their own lives, then again, those things can gradually fade away. Because building on an earlier point that James had made about the businesses, the collapse in local businesses here because of the pandemic. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. There's like that basic Fordist logic, the give workers money and they can afford to buy your crap, right? If we want businesses to survive, we put money in the hands of people. And we just keep handing it out in corporate welfare. We give a bunch of money to the businesses. That doesn't help the economy at all. That just helps their golden parachutes as the company collapses. You want the business to survive, you put money in the hands of people and they spend that money. That's the real economy. I think we need to stop thinking in terms of Wall Street and start thinking again in terms of the real economy, which we used to do.
So let's talk real quick about the major question that people always have when they're opposed to UBI. The idea that if you give everybody all this money, it's just free money, they're never going to want to work. What do you think of that logic, and what would you say to that?
Yeah, I can start on that, and maybe James, is the audio working? Okay, good. Yeah, like what Liz had mentioned, there are studies and experiments and all of that done. If you look at the data, the data shows otherwise. But besides that, I think it's taking that thought and actually applying it to the practical situations and that we actually live in. So to think about, for example, a lot of us are trapped in jobs that we absolutely hate, but we can't leave because we're trapped, because if we go find another job, then we actually might get fired, or if we do it now, then where's that source of income that's coming in while we're finding a job or whatever, or not being able to even have the time to find a job to get out of the situation that you're in. And I think that's not just the employment situation where somebody's trying to switch careers or try to get a promotion or try to get more educational learning, supplemental learning to go ahead and advance to a different position. Not only that, I think it's also showing for those who have abusive partners where they're able to also then gain that economic freedom and power, because nowadays, like, we have to admit, economic power, that financial freedom sort of it translates to power, your actual freedom in a way too. And so, like, even with COVID-19, we've seen cases where domestic violence has increased a lot because partners aren't able to leave the house, and they were forced to stay with their partners and keep within that. And so there's that. And so it's allowing people the means to, if they don't, to be able to save up to do something with that, whether that be paying bills or taking another opportunity for advancement. And it also reduces that kind of coercive power and the whole system that we have for our means testing, where it's very arbitrary in terms of the rules and standards that are set. So UBI actually reduces the coercive power that employers have, that abusive partners have, that our welfare system has over economically marginalized communities and individuals. And so that is something that I feel like we need to really remember and be aware of, because it actually pays you to do something. It gives you hope to know that I have something here. And I know that for me, like, there were plenty of times where even as a struggling attorney, I couldn't find a job for the longest time during a certain portion. And just to finally be able to no longer see like -10, -$20, but be able to build up your savings. Do you know how much power that gives you and how much motivation and hope that gives you? And that's what this UBI is. And so now I can really understand why Andrew himself called it the freedom dividend, because that's what it's starting to do. And it sort of turns on and ignites that spark in you. And so rather than thinking that it pays you to do nothing, it actually pays you to do something. And realistically thinking in your own situation, like if you were to go ahead and survey people and say, hey, if you knew you were getting $1,000 every month, what are you going to do with it? And you have them answer that thought, whew, like you'll get so many inspiring and uplifting answers. And I think that will show you otherwise that, yeah, there's this reactive kind of fear mentality of, and I think it's part of who we are, human nature, because whenever we hear or see something that we've never seen before or implemented or talked about, we're always scared of it, because that's a human reactive nature, because we're scared to face uncertain things. But I think it's kind of overcoming that and realizing beyond this little fear that makes up everything, there's actually this huge world of possibilities for that, for passing a UBI. And that's what I think we should really be kind of focusing on and really nailing down on when we talk about UBI with our communities.
Great, absolutely. James, Liam, or Liz, do you have some thoughts too?
Always. Same thing. It's something where, for example, my wife's an amazing baker. I didn't have this weight on when we met. And if she wanted to open a bakery in our local town, I mean, the economy just is not right now, and it wouldn't really make sense. But after UBI, not only would she have more capital herself to be able to invest and build a business, but it would create a better environment for new small businesses in our local area. Again, Victorville alone, $90 million a month. That would create more opportunities for people to be able to go out and do what they want. Like David Kim just said, it's not paying you to do nothing, it's paying you to do anything. It's actually giving you freedom to be uncoupled from that bad job or that bad relationship or the place you live if you want something better. It's actually giving you the freedom to do so. And even if you look at it from a capitalist perspective, you're giving people capital to participate in capitalism and participate in the system that, you know, people were born into, not by choice. You know, people weren't born into America and the capitalism in a system that is focused so much on money. You're not born into it by choice, but we need to give people a foundation to be able to build on. We need to be able to give them a floor so that when you do run into those bad situations, which always happens, it's not, you know, it's just normal. It'll give them a foundation, a floor to work up from, because I personally have been in those situations where it feels like quicksand, you can't find your way out of it, and there's different programs you can try to, you know, we go through, but it is tedious, and by the time you actually get help, then you're already super behind. And all we're saying is that people deserve a floor. Our local economies need more of a participation from our local communities. And the best way to do that is to put money directly in people's hands, because people aren't just going to, I mean, some people will save it, but most of it will be spent. It'll be put back in the community. And that's where it really creates a lot of opportunities. If you really think about it, again, it's giving more freedom to people. It's giving people more options. And that's something, when it comes down to it, again, it's just a lot of what we talk about in these conversations, just putting people first. The whole reason we built economies and governments is to, for the benefit and the support of people. And somehow that has lost sight recently, and we need to bring it back to saying, hey, we need to put people first, because when we put people first, our economies will do better, our families will do better, people will have better mental health. And yes, in the end, like, these companies will still be making money, and it'll make it more sustainable, so it benefits everyone.
Right. So I'm really glad that this was brought up, the question of making people lazy, because this just plays on the same kind of, right-wing tropes we've been hearing since the Victorian age. They keep repeating this kind of like fact-free nonsense and just pretending that there isn't direct evidence that contradicts it. And we can't allow that to happen there. Liz already mentioned the Finnish study that concluded recently, which showed that people who received UBI instead of an unemployment benefit were more likely to get work and to get back on their feet, not less likely to. And it's far from the only study there. But even outside of studies directly on the impact of a basic income, we actually have a ton of evidence from anthropology and evolutionary psychology that completely contradict this notion that most humans are lazy, that if you give them money, they're just going to sit around and smoke weed all day and watch TV. Most people want to do something. We want to feel creative and productive and valuable to other people, to serve fellows, to advance our own interests. Everyone is a little bit different in how this works, but most of us want to do something. We want to stay active. So it just doesn't make sense. And as James was just saying, if you give people that basic floor, that guaranteed minimum income, it gives people more potential to realize their dreams. How many more people would be able to start a business? What if you didn't have to worry about losing health care, and you didn't have to worry about the income difference? You could immediately, you could take that chance. I'm going to open up my hot dog cart and see what happens or something. I use hot dog carts as a joke example in one of my classes, so it occurred to me here. But more people will be able to create and to engage and to be creative. And actually, David mentioned something else earlier that I want to circle back to briefly, because it also comes back to something that I address in my classes. One of the things you often run into too with a lot of right-wing rhetoric is this idea that patriarchy is somehow in our nature. And that's complete bullshit. It's not. It developed with private property and land. The way this works out, it's a complicated story here, but it only goes back about 10,000 years or so, and at its furthest place. As soon as you started settling in one place, this land is better. This is in a sweet spot. That's too close to the river. That's too far from the river. This is the sweet spot. So my land is more productive. I now have an incentive to control some woman's sexuality, keep her tied to me, produce my own little dynasty to protect my land, and the rest is history, as we say. The reason we've been stuck with it for so long is women's lack of economic independence. The societies you see all around the world where women have less property rights, they are more likely to become property. The more economic independence you give them, and I can give you tons of examples of cultures where women have a bit more economic opportunity, they are always socially more equal to men. If we were to wipe that out completely and give everyone a basic floor economically, a way to stand on their own and to thrive, and no one would need somebody. David mentioned abusive partners. A lot of people are stuck. They're trapped in relationships because they know if they leave, they're stuck. How many people end up homeless or stuck in prostitution or something because they have no other opportunities? This would end that kind of scourge in society. So that alone is a good argument for it as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, so we'll take one more question for today, and it's one that's kind of floated around a little bit. So we've heard a few different ideas of what age it's good to start with stevia. 16, 18, I've heard even later on 21, 22. What are your views on what's the best age if we were to institute UBI right now? what would be the best age to start someone out and why?
I touched on it, so I'll start. Right now, I think any UBI implemented would need to include an additional emergency UBI to help people through the crisis and beyond. So right now, I still feel like it should be 18, but also an additional UBI for children of probably $500 a month. So I'd say 18-year-olds get $2,000 a month, and then for every child, $500. And then after the crisis, it would step down to 18 and up, and nothing for children, because I mean we've had lengthy discussions about if people would just have more kids for the additional UBI and things like that. I feel like 18 and older is appropriate. Again, we've had this conversation and people have different opinions, so that's not the final opinion from the UBI community. But I feel like a permanent UBI after the crisis of $1,000 a month for everyone 18 and older, and then again, the amount of money that it would put back into our communities would create more opportunities for people under 18 that did want to work and get jobs and do things like that. And that's my opinion. What's everybody else thinking?
So I'm gonna just 1 second. I'm just gonna introduce one wrinkle. So a lot of the devil's advocate positions on these are that if you're 18 years old now, people are staying home longer, right? So you're at home with your parents. If you're 18, typically people are in the family longer. So I mean, the devil's advocate position would be like, they're at home, mom and dad are paying for things. Why do they need the money?
Well, that's the thing where.
What's the argument to that?
Yeah, so people are staying home more because they have less economic opportunities and housing is so high. So largely due to economic reasons is why people would stay at home more. I would argue that given a UBI, more people would venture out earlier because they're able to sustain their own lives more and they would be given more opportunities. So that problem would ideally solve itself, where people are going out more and starting their own lives earlier because they aren't as economically challenged if they have a universal basic income.
And I would just like to add that I believe it should be 18 as well. And even though like my son still lives at home, he's going to college right now. And there's a lot of kids out there who need to go to work and therefore can't get a college education because they can't balance the two. So if we're giving, starting at 18, a universal basic income, it will help people stay, in school longer, get more of an education, and also get them out of their parents' home faster, which for a lot of parents out there, I would be happy with that. I would be happy if he could move out on his own before he's 21. We don't know if that's going to happen because we have to graduate college first, but if we had a universal basic income and he could live on his own, I know that he would. He just turned 19 this week, and I know that I would be supportive of that too. So I think that's one of the strong points that 18 should have that.
I like both of those, and I'm going to add a slight twist to it. I think it should be 18, but. So 18 as a floor for anybody, because it would give you the ability to be able to move out, to start a career, to whatever, to like go to college, whatever you want to do, and not be stuck living in mom's basement or whatever. But I'd also like a little flexibility in it. I like the idea of some kind of child stipend, because some people do have families, whatever. It is hard to take care of kids. I know the cost of childcare is just obscene. Of course, we solve that through other social programs. But if you want to replace social programs with UBI, then a child stipend becomes necessary. Otherwise, you have to deal with the fact that childcare can cost $18,000 in some parts of this country. Right, more than a lot of people make in an entire year. It costs as much as your rent. That's just obscene. So helping out with the cost of any kind of child living at home makes some sense to me long term. And if you said it that way, the one real stipulation I'd make there is that that some people do have adult responsibilities before age 18. I mean, some people have them later, they choose to stay home or whatever, but there are 15 and 16-year-olds who have dropped out of high school and living on the streets right now. And a UBI that starts universal at 18, it leaves them behind. So then you're stuck with, them being still homeless, in prostitution, whatever they've had to do to survive, where if we set it instead at the age of adult financial responsibility. So the age at 18 or the age at which you are able to take care of yourself. So then we can scoop those people up immediately and give them a chance to start their lives over and take care of things.
All right, do we have any other thoughts? So, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of a wrap up. So I'm going to ask all of our speakers to give us some thoughts. We're going to start with Liz, then we're going to go to Liam, and then the last thoughts will go to James and then David.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about something other than universal basic income for my closing thought, only because it is dire and important in this moment. ACA 5, which is the California Act for Economic Prosperity and Opportunity for All, just passed the state assembly this past week with the 2/3 majority vote that it needed to. It is moving on to the Senate. It needs to pass the Senate before June 25th so that it can be on the November ballot for the voters to decide if we should repeal Prop 209. So if everybody could do a little bit of research, and feel free to reach out to me. You can message me on Facebook. You can call me on my cell phone, 619-807-6947. This is so important. I need you to call your state senator and ask them to support ACA 5. What it will do is it will make things fair again for women and minorities. Women in California are paid 80 cents to every dollar that a man makes, which is actually great compared to the national average. So Dr. Shirley Weber is one of the authors of the bill, and she said, you know, Prop 209, it passed in 1996, just to give you guys some background. But she said, since becoming law in 1996, Proposition 209 has cost women and minority-owned businesses $1.1 billion each year. It has perpetuated a wage gap wherein women make 80 cents on every dollar made by a man, and has allowed discriminatory hiring and contracting processes to continue unhindered. So right now, we're on the streets, we're fighting right now because Black Lives Matter, and we need to make shit right. One of the first baby steps to make shit right now at the state is getting ACA 5 to pass and to be on the ballot in November for voters to decide. So again, call your state senators. The vote's coming up soon in the state Senate, and we want to make sure that they all support it. My two state senators down here in my district, so the 40th, and then Tony Atkins. So we have two so far, but the Riverside people, East County, San Diego people, get on the phones if you're friends with any senators and have that good relationship. Make those conversations because we need this. We definitely need this. It's the step in the right direction. So thank you so much. Again, Liz Liberty for State Assembly in the 71st Assembly District.
Great, Liam.
Okay, so I really want to thank James and David for sharing their thoughts and for standing with me on this to push this idea in the national stage. And I really want to thank Liz for her support of the idea. The way to solve poverty has been staring us in the face for decades, and it's time to stop screwing around, stop leaving so many Americans behind, and make the American dream real again for more people. And just as the real closing kind of point here, I want to say, if you really want to see or hear this kind of idea championed in Congress, the best thing you can do is donate to my and David's campaigns right now. We're among the only candidates left running in the country. There's only a handful of us running on UBI as a platform position. This allows us to start pushing that idea and getting it more into the media and keep that momentum going here. This pandemic has hurt a lot of the fundraising for these grassroots campaigns, and we really need your support there. But we are ready to fight for you, and with your help, we can.
All right, James Ellars.
Yes, thank you, Liam and David, for everything you're doing. It is definitely something that is needed, and as more time goes on, we're going to need more people like you running for Congress and doing what you're doing. So again, thank you for what you're doing. And absolutely, for those watching, if you can support their campaigns, please absolutely support their campaigns. The core value behind what a lot of the people supporting UBI, the core value is humanity first. people first. Everything we're trying to do is just trying to make our society, our economy better for people. Because when it comes down to it, I mean, what's all this for if our people are suffering, if our people are, can't support themselves, like basic things. And that's one reason why I'm supporting universal basic income so much. I have two kids. Elaine is 5, Jameson's 3, and the way the world's going right now is not something I can just sit back and just kind of let happen, right? I really feel that we have the tools and we have the opportunities and the things in order to make a better world and make a better impact and make things better for the generations that follow us. And we have to keep having these discussions to get these in the spotlight and to get more people like Liam and David and Liz into office to push for these things on behalf of the people, so that we can, again, create a better world for everyone. And that's one thing, huge thing with universal basic income, is that it actually will do so much good. And it's something where there is a learning curve. If you haven't heard of universal basic income before, or if you've only heard of it a few times, I challenge you just to dig into it. I'm not saying, go one way or another. Just look into the details, see what you think, and I think you'll be impressed with how much of an impact it will actually make on our society. Like, again, politics aside, if you're looking at something to help yourself, help your family, help the people around you, universal basic income and other policies that put people first are things that we need to be pushing right now, especially in this time that what's going on in the world. We need to just put people first and do things that are less divisive and more unifying. And there's no reason that in the richest country in the history of the world, whereas Liam said our workers and people are far more productive and we work more than anywhere else in the world, there's no reason that people should be left behind. And that's why we do what we do, because we want people taken care of. We want people to be able to have basic needs covered. And one of the solutions, there are many solutions. One of the solutions that I feel will have the most impact in the shortest amount of time is universal basic income. So again, please look into it. Please support these candidates as much as possible. We want this Humanity First movement to be a movement, not a moment. So a lot of what we're doing is for the long term to make sure solutions like this will stay in the spotlight, and that will be the focus moving forward. So again, I'm working with a lot of people, and I'm working through an organization, Forward United, that I founded for these specific things. And again, support candidates like these people we have here, and we can get these things done.
And the last word of the day.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for having me and for inviting me on this panel. And thank you so much for moderating, Chisa. Going back, before I close out, going back to the question from before, the age question, I also agree for right now, because times are really tough. I agree that there should be a smaller amount given to those who are minors currently, because a lot of parents have to be home working and taking care of their children and doing everything else. And so they are losing out on their hours as well. So that's important. And kind of moving forward after whatever reasonable time period that is, then we can go ahead and talk about what that permanent UBI amount or age would be. And I agree that it should be over 18, but with the exception of emancipated minors in each state, because we do have lost youth and different people who are left to themselves before turning age 18. And so that was a very important point that Liam had mentioned. But yes, thank you so much for all of you who are watching right now. With kind of the direction that our country is going, it's sad to say that we are on that path if we don't pivot sharply right now to another direction. We are on that path to those Hollywood dystopian movies that we see all the time, and they're just manifestations of our subconscious coming out, and that's a very horrific thing to think about, to be honest. And it's a matter of us realizing that and catching that before it happens, and then also us alchemizing that and converting that into active and proactive energy. What are we doing to address things that are going on? How are we going to give our people bootstraps to pull themselves up with, and not say, oh, go achieve the American dream when they have nothing? Because all of us and all of you who are watching know that life isn't one to live, to toil and work like ants every day until the last day that you breathe without having ever experienced what life is like. That's not what life is about. And so I think for us to wake up and realize on a bigger grand scale, it's this self-awareness, self-compassion, where we talk about showing self-compassion to yourself. I think it's really time for us to step up, to really live that in action, to really care for ourselves. And that's saying, no, you can't treat us like that anymore. And it's not saying that figuratively. It's not going to a protest and then having that stop. Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, they're not stopping until the Mayor Garcetti reduces that 54% budget all the way down to 10%, because we matter, Black Lives Matter. And so it's this mentality that we really need to break and fix for our own leaders, because they're living in their own bubbles, completely disconnected and unbased and ungrounded in their own communities. They have no idea what that experience and struggle is like, because they're not able to connect with that. And so it's our time to show them that that's not right anymore. And just to kind of give you a more concrete example, my opponent, a lot of people ask him, what about universal basic income? Why means test? And his answer is always, because those that need it more should get more money. But it's like, how dare you determine who needs money and who doesn't need money when you've never been in their finances? What the hell? How dare you say that household doesn't need money and that household needs it, when you have no idea and you've never sat at the table with them talking about what their struggles are? How dare you say that? How dare you not vote for rent and mortgage cancellation and instead vote for a rent relief fund where applicants have to jump through hoops and hurdles? How dare you put that burden on them? And this has to stop. We need to pay attention and realize that all of this lip service is shit. And so this really must stop. And so I think it's for all of us to really take action and to be proactive and to be as voiced and opinionated and engaging in discussions like this, whether it be online or offline. And so that's just kind of the last thing I wanted to impart, and support candidates like Liz, Liam, myself, and the other UBI candidates that are running across the country right now. Because we really are focused on making this happen and really passing UBI. So thank you for having me, everyone.
Thank you for coming. So next week, everyone, we are going to be talking with Georgine Tomasi and Kathy Rowling about back to school during a pandemic. We want to make sure we have everyone there, because we have some incredible people with us to help demystify some of what's going on behind the scenes and to help us, have the courage to get back out there with our children in a safe way, get some tips that we need. Until then, be safe, stay home if you can, and be well.